What do you mean you canceled the reservation? I held my phone closer, walking away from my desk at work to find a quiet nook in the hallway. The engagement party is on Saturday. We sent out invitations weeks ago. The venue was simply too expensive. Jenna, my mother replied, her voice carrying that practiced calm she used when delivering unpleasant news. Your father and I discussed it, and we just can't justify spending that much on a party. We'll find something more appropriate. Appropriate? I could feel my face flushing with anger. The Riverside Terrace was my dream venue. I've talked about having important celebrations there since I was 16. Dreams need to align with reality. Dear. Now, I've been looking at a charming restaurant with private rooms that would be perfectly suitable. We've already put down a deposit, I interrupted. How much could you possibly be saving by canceling now? A telling pause. It's not just about the money, Jenna. It's about setting reasonable expectations for your future. With David's background, perhaps it's better to start with something more modest. The implication was plain, and it made my stomach knot. I ended the call quickly after promising to chat about it later, even though I knew the decision had already been made. My name is Jenna Whitfield. I'm 29 years old, and despite being raised by wealthy parents in Cincinnati's elite Amberley Village neighborhood, I've spent my whole life proving I could make it on my own. I built a successful career in architectural design without my father's connections. I bought my own condo without touching my trust fund, and I fell in love with David Chen, a brilliant software developer who grew up with nothing but built something extraordinary for himself. Even if my parents couldn't see beyond his modest attire and unassuming demeanor, all I wanted was one day. One perfect day. A celebration where my worlds could come together, where David and I could announce our engagement, surrounded by the people we loved, in a place that felt special. And now, my parents had taken even that away, with barely a week's notice. As I walked back to my desk, my phone chimed with a text from my sister, Vanessa. Mom just told me about Riverside. So sorry. But silver lining? She's upgrading my birthday venue to make up for the family humiliation. Isn't that wonderful? I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the meaning sank in. They hadn't canceled because of the cost. They had canceled because they were embarrassed. Embarrassed of David, of our engagement, of me. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part. My sister's birthday was the weekend after our canceled engagement party. Growing up in the Whitfield family meant understanding that appearances mattered above all else. My father built Cincinnati's largest commercial real estate firm through connections forged on golf courses and charity galas. My mother sat on the boards of the city's most prestigious cultural institutions, ensuring our family name appeared in all the right society columns. Vanessa thrived in this world. 2 years younger than me, she embraced the family legacy, dating only men from appropriate backgrounds, considering law school not out of passion, but because it was expected. She was the daughter my parents had always wanted, polished, predictable, properly aligned with their values. I chose a different path. In college, I volunteered designing community centers in underserved neighborhoods instead of joining my mother's sorority. After graduation, I turned down my father's offer of a corner office at Whitfield Properties and joined a small, innovative architectural firm focused on sustainable design. Each choice widened the distance between us. Still, I believed my parents, respected me for forging my own way, even if they didn't understand it. When I met David at a tech conference where I was presenting on smart building design, he was unassuming in his plain button-down shirt and worn jeans. But the moment he opened his mouth, I knew he was brilliant. We talked for hours afterward at a nearby coffee shop. He was insightful, kind, genuine, traits I had found in short supply in my parents' social circle. After 6 months of dating, I brought David home for dinner. The evening was tense. My parents asked pointed questions about his education, a public school on scholarship, his family, middle class, His father, a high school teacher. His mother, a nurse. When David mentioned he still drove his college car, a 15-year-old Honda that ran perfectly fine, my father barely concealed his disapproval. Later that night, my mother offered me a thin smile. Well, at least he's resourceful, as if frugality was an exotic trait she was trying to be open-minded about. I told myself they just needed time to see what I saw in him, to appreciate his intelligence, his warmth, his incredible heart. Instead, when David proposed 6 months later with a simple yet meaningful ring he designed himself, my parents' congratulations were lukewarm at best. "A long engagement is wise," my father had said. "Marriage is a lifetime commitment. You want to truly know someone before taking that step." What he really meant was, he hoped I would come to my senses. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The engagement party they had begrudgingly agreed to host was never meant to happen. 3 days after the cancellation, I drove to my parents' house. I had been avoiding their calls, needing time to process my anger before confronting them. As I pulled into the curved driveway, I noticed the extra cars parked outside. My aunt's Mercedes, my father's business partner's Range Rover, Vanessa's BMW, inside. I found them in the sunroom, huddled around catering samples and floral arrangements. My mother was gesturing animatedly at a table layout. "The riverside terrace has such beautiful natural light," she was saying. "And if we place the head table here overlooking the river—" "What is this?" 5 heads turned toward me in shock. My mother recovered first. "Jenna, we didn't know you were stopping by. We're just finalizing details for Vanessa's birthday." I blinked. Celebrating at the riverside terrace? It wasn't a question. A heavy silence fell over the room. My aunt suddenly became very interested in her phone. My father's business partner mumbled something about a call he needed to make and slipped out. Vanessa at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "I told Mom it was too soon after your situation," she muttered. But she insisted. The venue was perfect, and, well, it was already available. "Available," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "Because you canceled my reservation." My father straightened his golf shirt. "Jenna, let's discuss this privately." "Why?" I challenged. "Everyone here already knows what happened. You canceled my engagement party because it was too expensive, and then booked the same venue for Vanessa's birthday." I'd love to hear the explanation. My mother's smile never wavered. With Vanessa's guest list, the riverside makes perfect sense. The connections your father can build there. And my guests weren't important enough? My celebration wasn't worth it? My father exhaled heavily. "Jenna, your fiancé isn't good enough for this family. Deep down, you know that. We're just trying to save you from making a mistake you'll regret." The words struck like a slap. For the first time, I saw them clearly. Conditional love. Shallow values. The absolute certainty that they knew best. I walked out without another word, and I never looked back. What should have been our engagement party? I woke to see David already clothed and having coffee on our small balcony. "I was thinking," he said when I joined him, "maybe we should go to Vanessa's party." I nearly choked on my first sip of coffee. What? Why would we subject ourselves to that? "Because running away and hosting our own party seems like acknowledging they've won," he said thoughtfully. "But showing up, being ourselves, not letting anyone determine our actions, that's standing our ground." "They'll be cruel to you," I warned. "They'll make snarky comments and treat you like you're unseen." David shrugged. "They already think I'm not good enough. What's the worst that could happen?" By the time we arrived at the riverside terrace, that evening I had pushed myself into such a state of fear that my hands were shaking. The venue was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Ohio River. Crystal chandeliers casting a pleasant glow over beautifully set tables, and flower arrangements that presumably cost more than my monthly rent. My mother spotted us first, her rehearsed grin fading only for a moment before she composed herself and slipped over. "Jenna, what a surprise! And David!" She dropped her voice. "Darling, this is a private family event. We didn't send you an invitation." "I know," I said, mirroring her gentle tone but instilling toughness into my voice. "You made it quite apparent where I stand. Yet Vanessa is still my sister and I'm here to support her." My mother's smile tightened. "Of course, how mature of you. Just please try not to make this evening about your situation. Tonight is about celebrating Vanessa." As she moved away to welcome other guests, David squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "I will be," I promised, though my confidence was wavering. The evening advanced gradually. My father scarcely acknowledged us, focused instead on the Henderson family, specifically Jonathan, whom he'd seated next to Vanessa despite her evident discomfort. David was excluded from conversations, served last at dinner, and regularly mistaken for waitstaff by my parents' friends. The ultimate blow came at my father's toast. Standing at the head table, champagne flute raised, he beamed at Vanessa. "We're celebrating not just a birthday evening, but a lovely young woman who represents the Whitfield values," he announced. "Vanessa has shown dedication to family tradition, professional excellence, and making the right relationships for a prosperous future." His gaze drifted from Vanessa to Jonathan Henderson before continuing. "In fact, I'm delighted to say that Vanessa is being promoted to junior partner at Whitfield Properties, where she will help lead our exciting new partnership with Henderson Financial Group." Applause erupted while I sat transfixed in amazement. This wasn't just a birthday party or even a professional announcement. It was an organized business merger between families, one that would bind Vanessa to Jonathan, making any prospect of her taking her own path increasingly difficult. And suddenly, with crystal clarity, I knew what was happening. This wasn't about David not being good enough. It was about control, about sustaining the Whitfield dynasty on their terms. When realization dawned, I felt David tense beside me. Watching his gaze, I followed his line of sight to my father, immersed in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. The stranger, however, continued staring in our direction. His expression shifted from disbelief to something like awe. "David," I whispered. "Who is that guy?" "Robert Maxwell," he answered tightly, "CEO of Pinnacle Tech." Before I could ask why the CEO of one of the country's biggest tech companies would be interested in us, David was already standing. "We need to leave. Now." As we slipped out, I caught one last glimpse of Robert Maxwell dragging my father aside, waving in our direction with unmistakable urgency. Something had just changed, yet I didn't understand what. "Are you going to tell me what that was about?" I asked as we drove home. The tension in David's jaw was visible in the glow of the dashboard lights. He sighed, shoulders relaxing slightly. "Remember that project I've been working on for the past 3 years? The one I couldn't talk much about? The algorithm for predictive analysis in healthcare? The one that's coming along whenever?" I asked. I had always respected his secrecy around his job, assuming it was typical startup discretion. David glanced at me, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "It's done, Jenna. The development, the testing, everything. I've been in acquisition talks for the past month." I blinked, processing. "That's wonderful, but what does that have to do with tonight?" "Robert Maxwell's company is buying my software. The deal finalizes Monday." The implications started sinking in. "Is it a huge deal?" David's laugh held. "No humor. Pinnacle Tech doesn't make small acquisitions." Before I could press further, my phone buzzed with notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 2 from my mother, and a text from Vanessa. "What the hell did your fiancé do? Dad and Maxwell are losing their minds. I showed David the text. Care to fill me in on the rest?" When we got home, David pulled out his laptop and showed me the press release scheduled for Monday morning. My eyes widened as I read. "Pinnacle Tech acquires BioPredict for $175 million. $175 million? I gasped, staring at the screen. David, this is life-changing. He nodded. That's why I've been so distracted lately. The negotiations, the legal reviews, the planning. He took my hands. I wanted to tell you, but the confidentiality agreements were binding until the deal closed. My mind raced, connecting the dots. So, Robert Maxwell recognized you tonight. That's why he was talking to my father. Apparently? David ran a hand through his hair. I guess he thought your father already knew who I was. Just then, my phone rang again. My father. I hesitated, then answered on speaker. Jenna, he began, his voice unusually deferential. Is David with you? I'd very much like to speak with him about a potential opportunity. It's nearly midnight, Dad, I answered coolly. What opportunity could possibly be so urgent? A pause. Robert Maxwell mentioned that David's firm has produced some exceptional healthcare technology. Whitfield Properties is expanding into the medical office sector, and we'd be extremely interested in discussing potential collaborations. The audacity was breathtaking. Hours ago, my father couldn't be bothered to acknowledge David's existence. Now, sensing a business opportunity, he was falling over himself to connect. Indeed, I said, a plan forming. We'd love to discuss this more. How about brunch tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Riverside Terrace? My father immediately agreed. After hanging up, David looked at me questioningly. The Riverside Terrace? Are you sure? Absolutely, I said, my determination growing. If they want to talk business with you, they can do it where our engagement party should have been, and face exactly who you are, not who they imagined you were. David grinned, but concern lingered in his eyes. Jenna. I never wanted my work or money to matter in our relationship. That's why I drive an old car, wear simple clothes. I wanted to be valued for my mind, not my bank account. And I do value you for that, I promised. But tomorrow isn't about the money. It's about showing my parents the cost of their judgments. Tomorrow, we would rewrite the rules, on our own terms.